Good morning and welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And here we are as head and take a look at what we've got here. All right, so we were in this poem, we've just described God's blessings on the Jewish people. They're established in their land. They've been able to conquer their enemies. They are prospering in all kinds of ways. And this is their reaction. Vayishman Yeshurun Vayivat. And Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. So Yeshurun means, it comes from the word yashar, which means right or upright, and it is a name that is used to describe the Jewish people, Israel, except here it is in a very ironic sense. In other words, the people that are supposed to be upright, and here they are acting in anything but upright, in an upright way. And also, of course, what is this describing? It is describing something so interesting. In some ways, it's obvious, and yet it's not obvious. And that is how appreciation, how gratitude is such a foundational kind of thing. Because instead of being grateful and instead of appreciating all these incredible blessings that they have, they don't in the least. They could, all they can do is sort of feel entitled to what they have. And of course, the kicking means, as you'll see, it'll define exactly what they mean by that, is kicking against God. And of course, the awesome level of it, and the literal meaning of awesome, is to what extent does it describe our current situation? Are we different? Because truthfully, technology has brought many, many blessings, and science has, the scientific approach to things, and our understanding, the way in which science has so deepened our understanding of all kinds of processes, nature included, and and we've benefited from it. And the question is, do we ultimately just attribute all this to our own intelligence, and we never ask ourselves, well, how did we get that intelligence to begin with? Did we give it to ourselves? We didn't. And so this is the sad commentary that this poem is mentioning, that, and the sense in which why it is still worthwhile, so deeply worthwhile, to study Torah, is because it talks about human beings and the nature of humanity, and trying to recognize our shortcomings and being able to try to address them as best as we can. Going on, Shamanta, you grew fat. Avita, you were gross. It has, Ovi has to do with the meaning of thickness, but you can see these are all synonyms. Kasita, again, you grew fat. And this is from the root keset. Rashi is going to tell us this letter, of course, is a sin. This letter here is a samach, but Rashi is going to tell us that they're related. They're basically the same thing. And the word keset means a bolster, like a pillow, a thick pillow. And for that reason, by transference and association, kasita means, you became fat like a bolster, right? Vayitosh, and he abandoned Eloha Asahu, or the God who made him. Vayinabel, and he disgraced, or he vilified, Sur Yeshuato, the rock of his salvation. And salvation, of course, we know, has several meanings. It can mean, of course, on a this worldly kind of sense, when we are healed or saved from danger or other kinds of adversity. But it also certainly has, even within the Jewish tradition, the meaning of immortality, which of course puts a whole new kind of value to life. So that's the reaction, not appreciation, but just the reverse, Avita. So Rashi tells you that this word avita, which is a verb, lashon ovi, it has the same meaning as thickness. Ovi is the thickness of something. Kasita, and notice how he says, kamo kasita. And there's the samach, right? So he's showing you, this is a shin, and he's showing you that it's the same word as kasita. Lashon, and this has the meaning of, and he quotes Job. This is chapter 16. Ki kasa fanav bel chelbo, right? Because his face is covered with his thickness, with his fat. And Rashi explains what that image is supposed to be. Ka'adam sheshamein mibifnim, like a person who is internally mibifnim, internally fat. Ve'uksalav nichpalim, and his flanks are doubled, like a double chin or a double, right? Mibachutz, externally. V'chein hu omer, and likewise, sorry, this is Job 16. I have 15, but it should be 16, I believe. Vayas pimo ale kesel. This is a very poetic form of Hebrew here, right? And he creates folds of fat on his flanks, something like that, right? Kasita, again, he's going back into this word again. Yesh lashon kal, he says grammatically, right? Normally it would be kisita, which is a PL form. It's a different verbal form. But he says that this kasita, which is a kal form means the basic form of the verb. It has to do with Hebrew grammar. Belashon kisui. It also has we do see the meaning of covered, right, in this grammatical form of the kal. And he gives an example from Proverbs chapter 12. Ve'chose kalon arom, right? Arom means a prudent, sometimes it's meant as shrewd, right? A shrewd man covers his disgrace, doesn't advertise it. Okay. Ve'im katav kisita dagush, right? And were it written kisita, that's the PL form, where the sin would have a dot in it, right? Haya nishma kisita et achirim. He says in that form, it is actually transitive, that it means you've covered others. Come on, and he gives an example. This looks like Job 15, ki kisa panav, for he covered his face. So again, you see that the verb is transitive there. It takes a direct object. Vayinabel tsur yeshuato, and he disrespected the rock of his salvation. Ganehu, meaning he showed contempt for God. Ubizahu, again, bizahu means to mock or show contempt, right? Kamoshinemar, as it states in Ezekiel chapter 8, Achorehem, their derrieres, right? Literally, the word derriere in French means behind. You're behind. Sometimes we use that referring to a person's buttocks, right? So their behinds, El Hechal Hashem, this is from Ezekiel, he says, their behinds are towards God's sanctuary, etc. So just showing disrespect. Ein nibul gadol mizeh. There is nothing more degrading than showing your butt to someone. So, okay. By the way, that's why generally when you take your leave of majesty, you take 3 steps backwards so that you're not just turning face on them. And likewise, when we stand to do the silent devotion, the Amidah, we take 3 steps back when we are finished. It's a way of showing respect to royalty. We'll take another verse. Yaknihu. So this is getting into details as to how they showed their lack of appreciation. Yakniuhu Vizarim, they enraged him with strange ones, meaning strange gods. The To'evot, with the disgraceful things, with disgusting things, Yach Isuhu, they made him angry. Notice, by the way, how we know this is poetry because of parallelism, right? Yakniuhu Vazarim is parallel but To'evot Yach Isuhu. And we notice this in many of the verses, right? So that's a typical style of biblical poetry. Let's find the place here. Here, Yakni Uhu, right? They made him angry. They enraged him. So make sure we got that right. And here we are. Hiviru Hamato, they caused his anger to inflame, Ukinato, and his jealousy. And that's the word that's used in terms of how God reacts to people who worship idols, who worship things other than the divine. It's like, and the metaphor is used of being betrayed or being disloyal, as in a marriage. But to'evot, right? So in disgusting things, but ma'asim to'avim, and he says in actions that are disgusting. So we're going to get here into an issue for us because he says specifically, for example, mishkaz zachur, which is pederasty, right? And in other words, homosexual behavior. And I need to clarify this. I don't know that it's going to help that much. But my understanding here of the biblical position above this is the issue is the actual act of coition, of coitus. That's the act. But as far as one man loving another man or a woman loving another woman, that is not forbidden. It's the actual mishkav. It means the actual lying. And of course, I realize that is not a popular position these days, but I think the distinction is important because it applies also with heterosexual behavior as well, because there are all kinds of relationships that are forbidden, but what is forbidden about them is the physical act engaged in that. And I know that we're in a cultural war on that particular issue, but it's my responsibility to share this with you. And if this is helpful, I certainly think it's different from the position that forbids even men being affectionate of other men. The question is how you're doing it here, right? Ukshafim, witchcraft, she ne'emar, concerning which it's stated by him, to'eva, where it talks about these are to'evot. And believe me, this word to'eva, which means disgusting, right? Or there are other translations of it. Abomination is sometimes how it's translated. There's certainly other things that are considered abominations, if you want to use that word. I think it's an overstatement myself there. Onwards. Other actions that show a lack of appreciation. Yizvechu lashedim, I think it's Yizbechu lashedim. They made offerings to demons, lo Eloha, not divine, Elohim, gods, lo Yidaum, they had, I believe it means that either lo Yidaum means they didn't recognize them, they didn't know them. So as to who the subject of that verb is, we can see if Rashi clarifies it, okay? But in other words, gods that were never known to the nation, I believe, whether or not it means that the gods themselves, never showed any evidence of concern for them, but I will take it simply as my first meaning. Chadashim, new, mikarov ba'u, that have come from close by. In other words, again, this would also could be understood on two levels. One is that they just made their acquaintance. In other words, they became aware of these particular gods. And part of the idea of a god is that it transcends in time, that it's been there for such a long time. And so, but also this mikarov, close, could also mean geographically, as you'll see from the rest of this verse. Lo sa'arum avotechem, your ancestors never were aware of them, something like that. So, in other words, they took on new religions. And of course, the thing about new religions is, what is their basis of authority? What is their basis of legitimacy? So I think that's part of it. So let's go into the Rashi on this. Okay. Lo Eloha, right? So Targumor, Rashi goes to the Targum, the Aramaic translation, de late bahon sorech. So he says the way the translation goes is that there was no need, there was no reason why they needed to worship these gods. They weren't doing anything for them, which in some ways, of course, takes into account the second understanding that I had of it, of this particular thing. In other words, there was no real reason for them to put their trust in these particular gods. Tzarich ilu, comment. Ilu haya bahem tzorech. In other words, were there some reason for them to worship these gods? They had some need for them, some utility, is how Sfaria translates this. Lo haita kin'a kfula. The anger, God's anger with them, would not have been twice what it would have been, kamo achshav, as it is now. In other words, the fact that there was absolutely no need for them to be worshiping these gods made it doubly insulting and doubly awful. Chodashim mikarov ba'u, right? New, coming from close by. And this, he says, is in the Sifrei, this rabbinic midrash on Numbers and Deuteronomy. Afilu ha'omot. So the idea is that even the other nations, lo haya regilim bahim, even the other nations did not consider them gods. Nochri, in other words, Nochri, a non-Jew shehaya ro'eh otam, who would see Israelites worshiping these gods, haya omer, would think to themselves, Zeh tzelem Yehudi, this is a Jewish god, this is a Jewish idol, because they themselves, the non-Jews, never worship these things. Lo sa'arum avotechem, your ancestors never took heed of them. Lo yaru mehem, they never feared them. Lo amda sa'aratam. Oh, this is lovely. So Rashi is taking this word sa'arum and saying their hairs never stood on end mipnehem, in encountering them. In other words, there was never your ancestors never feared these particular gods. Derech sa'arot, he says, it is the way of hairs ha'adam, on a person, la'amod, to stand on end, mechamat yirah, on account of fear, that when you are in deep fear, your hairs actually stand up. Kach nidrash b'sifrei, he says, this is the way the Sifrei interprets this. V'yesh lefared od sa'arum, he says you can also interpret this word sa'arum, lashon, and he's quoting Isaiah 13, or se'irim, as in demons or something like that, right? Yirakdu sham, they dance there. Unless we understand se'irim as a goat, and I think sometimes they understand them as goat demons or something like that, but I guess, so let's see. Oh, no, here he says, Se'irim hem shedim, right? He says, these Se'irim are shedim. Shedim means demons. Lo asu avotechem Se'irim halahu. Your ancestors never made, literally, but maybe it means they never had any use for these particular demons, these losarim. So a different interpretation of this. So I think we are going to stop here. Oh, maybe we'll take one more. So I see it's we have a little bit of time. So let's take a look. Any comments on what's going on here? Any thoughts and reactions, please? All right. Sur, so again, emphasizing the lack of appreciation. Sur Yeladcha Teshi. You rejected, you set aside the rock who bore you. Vatishkach El Mecholalecha, and you forgot the God who gave birth to you, right? Who formed you. Again, as I said, just a complete rejection on the part of the Jewish people of the source, the ultimate source of all their blessings and their prosperities. Teshi, here Rashi, Teshi, Tishkach, means you forgot about. V'rabotenu darshu, and our rabbis interpreted, Kesheba lehetiv lachem, right? That when he comes to do good for you, to help you prosper, atem machisim lefanav, you may do things to enrage him, umatishim kocho. Okay, so this again, this word teshi, and you weaken his power, milehetev lachem, from doing good to you. So in other words, your behavior, in a sense, weakens God's ability to bless them, to benefit them. El mecholalecha, the God who formed you. Moitziacha, so the mecholel has to do with the birth, like the birth canal and being born. Motziacha me'rechem, taking you out of the womb. Lashon, this has the meaning of Yecholel Ayalot, right? There's that in that psalm, causes the rams, but not really rams, so it have to be used, but to bear, right? To give birth. Chil kayoleda, so there's another thing. So Chil in this case has perhaps something to do with birth pains, right? In other words, experiencing trembling like a woman in childbirth, kayoleda, like a woman in childbirth. So, right. Then we can get on to a new idea, as will God willing. So next time we meet, we'll start here. Very good. I'm going to stop the share. Okay. No thoughts, no comments?
No, I got something.
Good. Go on.
Well, when you were talking about le derrière,
Yes.
it reminded me of people who bow to Mecca, who live between or who are between Mecca and Jerusalem,
Yes.
are pointing their derrière towards Jerusalem,
Yes.
which is a problem. I mean, just facing east is just facing east, as far as we're concerned, but that is an affront.
Is it an affront in their own tradition? Are they concerned? Is that an issue?
No, it's an affront to us.
Oh, okay. Well, I would say, personally, if I were to just personally comment, I would say it is not an affront to us in the sense that we would understand that they're pointing to Mecca because Mecca is to them their Jerusalem. And that's their main thought, that it may, here we're talking about people who intentionally are pointing their butts towards the temple. If you saw Amadeus, right? If you saw Yes, there's a scene where he's leaving the prince or the king or whoever, and he purposely points his, basically points his butt as he's leaving the room and bows, right? So
Mm-hmm.
intentionally. But I'd say that to me, this would not be an affront because it's not what they intend. That and also the way they bow to Mecca, they actually crouch.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think the issue is more they're not doing it because they want to insult Jerusalem. Jerusalem, and I know there are questions about it, but it certainly is considered a holy city for them as well. And so there's no desire on their part to be insulting. And I think that's important. And I think the
Okay.
verse that we were reading was people who intentionally insult God in that way, that they're unashamed about it. But it is a good,
Okay. Thank you, because that's always been a little
yeah.
sticking point, you
Yeah,
know.
no, I think it has to do with the context. I think context is everything.
Sure.
Remember, circumstances alter cases. All right.
So
Well,
my question is, all right, when you are east of Jerusalem, do they still face east or do they face west?
no, they faced west. The idea
Okay.
is facing Jerusalem. And if you think of where Babylonia is, a lot of this comes from the book of Daniel, which talks about his had this attic and he had windows. And when he'd pray, he'd face Jerusalem. Well, if he's in Babylonia, guess which way he's facing? West
Southeast,
or
southwest. Yeah.
right, something like
Yep.
that, or west.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
people saw him doing this. The context of the story is there were people who were trying. He was pretty powerful and respected, and there were people who were his enemies who saw him doing that and reported him to the king, which I think is why he wound up in a lion's den. So, but that's the origin of facing
Okay.
Jerusalem.
Ooh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, let's stop the recording.